Well, I was born in July 1952, and I guess about maybe when I was 8 years old, I found a magazine, a Life magazine, with a picture of the UFOs from that sighting on the cover, with a big inquiry. You know, what are these UFOs? And so that kind of started it as a kid, and I asked my parents about it, and you know, they actually, you know, couldn't tell me what they were because they didn't know. They knew there was some mystery there. Then I saw The Day the Earth Stood Still as a kid, and I mean, that was a film that directly related to maybe some of the motives for visitations from other planets. And it certainly seems accurate today if you look at the way mankind in the last 100 years has basically started to turn this planet into a cinder. 3-4 holes in the ozone layer because of industrial production around the world, nuclear testing, wars. I'm just sure, just in theory, if there were another species in the universe monitoring us or near us, they would be very interested in what we're doing to this planet, to this planet's atmosphere, and to possibly neighboring bodies. So there would be a concern there. And I think that in terms of the extraterrestrial machines that are coming and going, that may be a part of their motivation. Well, recently, the most dynamic sighting that we've seen, because it's corroborated by an actual government, is the sighting that took place over Mexico recently, where drug surveillance twin-engine turboprop plane was at altitude taking pictures of possible smuggling routes, and they photographed with their infrared cameras 11 unidentified objects. Some of them were in pairs and in threes, and of course, you know, these were objects that couldn't be seen by the naked eye, but were visible on the infrared cameras. Well, the United States Air Force, after the news appeared in America, and it was covered on CNN and Fox. The footage was shown on Fox, it was shown on CNN, and in the Valley Daily News on the front page had a big headline, UFOs with a question mark, and it had pictures from that sighting. And of course, the United States Air Force had to respond, and they said it was swamp gas. So I don't know whether swamp gas is not visible to the naked eye and visible on infrared, whether it comes in multiple balls, whether swamp gas is capable of doing a complete circuit around an aircraft and then taking off at high speed and right angles into the sky. If it is, then maybe it was swamp gas. But somehow this seems to be a legitimate one, because the Mexican government decided we want to release this to the world. And this follows on the heels of the Belgian general who revealed some F-15 footage years ago of his Air Force planes chasing objects that were exceeding them in speed by twice again what his planes were going at. The French government, over the last couple of years, has released a comprehensive study on the UFOs. The Soviets have been, since the 1950s, engaged in numerous studies about landings, abductions, and the sightings. So we do have legitimate government inquiry going on, and in fact, as anyone in the field knows, the United States government for years has been covering this issue because they were compelled to cover it, because of Ken Arnold's sighting, because of the sighting over Washington in July '52, just after I was born, the famous shot of the V-shaped lights over the Capitol and over the Coast Guard station. So the government initiated originally, I believe it was, there were Project Sign, Project Grudge, the Condon Report, Project Blue Book, and then they engaged J. Allen Hynek. So the French, Belgian, Mexican, Iranian, and Turkish governments are not the only ones who address this issue. Our good old USA government has, in fact, seen the necessity to put people's fears or concerns at rest. And as anybody in the field knows, these studies went on, and these studies revealed that, you know, most of the sightings could be explained through conventional means, as either hoaxes or weather climatic things, but many of the sightings were unexplained. And so therein is where lies the mystery in all of this. Well, the presence of these obviously intelligently controlled machines tells us that we are dealing with beings who have anywhere from 1,000 to 1,000,000 to 10 million to 1 billion years advancement in technology on us. So you've got to figure that look what happened in the last 100 years. We have the Wright brothers at the turn of the century taking off in basically a fabric and wood aircraft. By 1969 we have lunar expeditions. In the year 2004 we have massive airplanes being built out of alloys and graphite, and this big ship that Airbus is building, the new Boeing plane. So in 100 years, from fabric and wood, we've come to, advanced metallurgy, fuel use, and propulsion in just 100 years. Imagine what a culture could accomplish in 1,000 years, or 10,000 years, or 1,000,000 years, or 1 billion years. It's not inconceivable that you have intelligently manufactured and controlled machines that can not only traverse great distances in space by mastering gravity and the time-space continuum, but also the interdimensional travel that might be possible. Many theories now purport that there were not only 4 dimensions at the creation of the entire multiverse 14 billion years ago at the time of the Big Bang. There were 11, maybe as many as 21 dimensions. So some of these beings may be coming from an extra dimensional place. And what it says is that these technologies have been harnessed, and that it's possible to use other fuels that don't rely just on simple combustion. And there are many theories. Some theories are that the military already knows about these forms of propulsion and lighter than air vehicles or metals that can be vibrated to a certain point where they become light waves, photons. But they're not telling us. They're not going to reveal that, obviously, to us, and we just have to keep the search going. So I think that it's incumbent on us as a race on this planet to begin to find alternatives to the fossil fuels, but we're just not doing it fast enough. Budgets are tight all around the world, and as far as putting money into the study of alternative technologies, funding research by people like Hutchinson, the money is just not there. If you look at NASA is getting chopped back because the funds that are flowing through government now are focused on the war in Iraq and other things. So we don't even have the money to keep up conventional space exploration, development of metallurgy, fuels, ion drive systems. So I don't see any government in the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years really putting the money into the kind of research that's needed to develop these alternative systems and to perhaps study what is driving these intelligent machines from somewhere else. Now, of course, that's on the visible side of things. We're hearing a lot about these special access programs where congressional money is approved by a very narrow slice of the membership in the legislature and given to the military to do basically carte blanche what they want with. So there could be a black military program that is producing what people are referring to now as the big black deltas, which are these huge black triangles that are being seen all around the world, the big black rectangles, which are also being seen all around the world. So maybe they look a little like this. The F-117, they look a little like the B-2 bomber. Maybe these are special access programs that have been applied to alternative technology and energy and are really practically at work today. But I don't see them revealing the sources of these programs nor their applications right now. Well, I think, as far as military applications, maybe they are being used already. Maybe we don't know. Maybe they're being used in a surveillance capacity. As far as weapons that could be associated with such vehicles, one would have to think that if the propulsion system is as sophisticated as it would need to be to have these vehicles just hover, stop, noiselessly take off at right angles, do 3 to 5 to 6 to 20,000 miles an hour, one would think that the military application would then take the form of, rather than rockets and projectiles, that probably a particle beam would be used, some kind of a laser, some kind of a disabling beam to disable equipment, to cause disorientation among men and troops. And of course, we have seen no evidence of this. I'm not sure that the U.S. military would want to play that card right now, because after all, the war in Iraq really is a conventional war. We have air superiority there already. There is no Iraqi Air Force. There was no Iraqi Air Force. We, in the United States, we have air superiority basically over the rest of the world. I'm sure there's some pretty hotshot MiG pilots in China and Russia. But I think if you put our Air Force up against any Air Force on this planet, we would prevail without the use of advanced technology of the type we're speaking of. So I think that the U.S., if they have these things, they would probably save them for a more drastic confrontation, perhaps a confrontation with beings that have the potential to be superior over us in terms of the applications of aviation today. So maybe these triangles, the big black deltas, the rectangles, are the next wave of the U.S. military's defense against what some might perceive as an extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional threat. Maybe these weapons or these flight systems now are being prepared to confront a race of superior beings that could have designs on the planet that are malevolent. I think it was Lord Hill Norton, or one of the British Air Force Defense Ministry staff who was assigned to study UFOs in the 50s. After he retired, he said that in his estimation there were 23 different species of being visiting the planet in numerous types of vessels. We know from the NASA UFO studies that you've done, and I think that theory, there's nothing wrong with that theory that I can see that doesn't point to what you postulate, and that is that there are benevolent beings that are trying to heal the planet, hence the size of these ships that we're seeing in the STS cameras, and the fact that the ozone has holes in it, the fact that water could be a healing element there. What are these lifesaver-shaped little Dropostone-shaped ships conveying to our planet? Well, we see them coming into the atmosphere, and on the STS tapes and other forms of exposure, they're not releasing personnel, they're not releasing projectiles, and no harm has come to the planet, through their intervention. So one can assume perhaps that maybe there are benevolent beings out there and malevolent beings out there, and maybe the United States government is preparing weapon systems to deal with the malevolent beings. Ronald Reagan said in a speech, he said, what if there were a species from another planet that was threatening us? We would all find a way to work together. And one can only think about the Star Wars system and the fact that there we had satellite-mounted cannon. Well, they'd be good for shooting down rockets. They also might be good for shooting down other invasive vehicles that are coming into our atmosphere. Ronald Reagan himself spoke about a UFO sighting that he had when he was governor of California in the Beach King Air that they used to use. They were coming from Sacramento. His wife was with him, Sacramento to Los Angeles, and a saucer clocked the plane for a good 45 minutes. And Reagan spoke of it to a lot of people. And I think maybe, part of his motivation in getting the Star Wars weapon system up might have been that to prepare ourselves for the day when other beings might come to this planet with designs of, who knows, taking minerals without authorization, taking people. We're probably just going to have to wait to see. Well, again, I have to go back to some of them might be here for good purposes, genuinely interested in perhaps helping mankind, and some are here for selfish purposes. Maybe these abductions, even though they're done in a objective but biological way, like we dissect frogs, maybe they're doing it just for fun and for sport. I mean, I don't know. I think probably that that the fear could be justified in some senses. Anne Druffel has written this book about how to prevent being abducted. And you really think, even if benevolent species coming to this planet and taking a man and a woman and taking ova out of a woman and sperm out of a man, that's tremendously invasive and very traumatic for the human beings. So even if the motives are good, these actions are as violent as anyone we're capable of on the planet. I think that a certain amount of fear is justified. If you look at Day the Earth Stood Still, the first thing that happens is the army is assembled and guns are shot at these beings and at the ship. If I were to speak for mankind to these beings that were coming here, I guess what I would say is, let's go to some neutral place. Let's have a meeting with scientists from all around the world leaders. Let's sit down and basically have a sort of a forum with you, the extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional beings. Let's sit down and kind of get to know each other. And human instinct is pretty good, and I think it would almost like be a sort of a G8 style kind of summit with world leaders, scientific leaders, and these beings, and you'd sit down with them, and after about a week or even a couple of days or maybe a few hours, you would really sort of get a sense of what they're up to. But of course, childhood's end, Arthur C. Clarke's great story. It looked like these beings were benevolent, even though they had a malevolent appearance, and in the end we find out that they meant no good for our planet. So I think it's important that some branches of the military and police be briefed on these in a very real sense, and be told, they are real, people are being abducted, there is mind control in play here, and that we do have to be vigilant. Now, if we knew that there was a purely benevolent race, like if something happened in Iraq where all of the electronics went out in the American military and all of the insurgents' rifles jammed, or we saw all of the polluted waters in North Carolina from the pig farming completely healed overnight, and different signs like this, then we would know we're dealing with a benevolent species, and then we could really be open and welcome. But then again, we would have to be cautious, because beings with that much power could give the impression that they're here to help when really they're not. So the verdict is out on all this. We just don't know which ones are benevolent, which ones are malevolent, and the degree to which they're going to continue interacting with our planet. But what would really help is if the United States military and police and government open it up to their staffs and say, look, this is something we really do have to consider, because, maybe the defense, the survival of our species could well be at stake. If you look at the history, from, say, Ken Arnold's first sighting in '47, going back to the Bible, Ezekiel's wheel, going back to the medieval manifestations of little saucers and UFOs, that painting of the Madonna that's very famous, in which it appears, up to now, there have been no mass murders by these beings. There's been no mass destruction of cities, but hundreds of thousands of people have been taken out of their lives, subjected to surgical experimentation released back into the population and are suffering trauma today for it. That is not good. There are definitely more video cameras out there, and definitely more sightings and definitely more credible witnesses. You know, the biggest thing in ufology in the 60s was Herb Shermer, the Nebraska Highway Patrolman, who was at the Ashland Oil tank farm out there in Nebraska, and he writes in his diary, you know, saw flying saucer, and then under hypnosis, turned out that he was taken aboard and informed of their intentions. Barney and Betty Hill. I mean, these were the key cases. Shermer, Barney and Betty Hill, the Pascagoula incident, Travis Walton. Now there are hundreds of cases like this, and I think that because it's in the consciousness, because we have, you know, a poll saying basically half of the world believes and half doesn't. We're reaching a point where, as Stephen Bassett talks about his time clock, it's like the nuclear time clock that we had in the 50s before we blew the world, you know, before we blew the world up. The theory that once the hands got to midnight, that's when all the nuclear weapons in the world would be discharged. Well, we've stopped that nuclear clock, thankfully. But as far as the UFO clock, he says we're 1 minute to midnight now, meaning that in a minute to midnight, something really, really spectacular is going to happen. Now, whether that's a mass appearance, whether that is, you know, come over to the Yankee Stadium during a game, I think possibly the next, maybe even in the next 5 years, we're going to have occasions like the one I experienced in upstate New York in the mid-'80s when I woke up in the middle of the night and I said to my wife, they're calling me, I want to go outside, they want me to come outside and see. She said, who? Something outside wants me to come out and say, oh, just go back to bed. I went back to bed, but in the next day in the media, in newspapers, in radio, all over upstate New York and Ontario and Quebec and Vermont, people spoke about this urge they had to go out of their houses at 3 in the morning and look up into the sky. And 12,000 people shared this urge, and they went out, and it was a big, big news story. And of course the Air Force said that a Chinese rocket had exploded over New York State, and what people saw was a massive, miles-high pink spiral in the sky above the Great Lakes. In Hull, Quebec, Canada, a few years afterwards, there was a story of several hundred people, almost 1,000 people, in this community, Gatineau, north of Hull, Quebec, Canada, in the Quebec province, sharing this urge to come outside and look up into the sky, and they also saw an apparition. So there are going to be more of these mass sightings. And, you know, the day that 1 million people in Idaho at a rock concert or something see it, that is when you're going to really get the conventional military and police sitting down to say, well, it's time to throw the Brookings Institution report out and lay it open to the people and let the people decide, you know, what must be done in conference with our state leaders. Well, you know, first of all, I'm claustrophobic, so I doubt I'll go up into space. But if I were to go up into space, I would have to say, look, you know, what we see up there and what we find, you know, we're just gonna have to throw out that law. There's a law.
According to NASA's Space Act, signed on July 29th, 1958, Section 102, Paragraph C, Subparagraph A, we read, information obtained or developed by the administrator in the performance of his functions under this Act shall be available for public inspection, except information authorized or required by federal statute to be withheld and information classified to protect the national security. Would NASA consider contact with an extraterrestrial civilization a threat to national security? And if they did, would they classify it to protect the national security?
So I would have to say, no, I couldn't agree to non-disclosure. I really couldn't if I saw something or photographed something. But I can see where other people, you know, wanting to do the best for their country, wanting to serve their country in a legitimate way would say, yes, I will not disclose. And this is based on the Brookings Institution report from the late 50s, which, you know, Congress commissioned, which said that if the existence of UFOs were revealed to the American populace, the American populace would not be able to handle it. They would defy church authority, police authority, military authority, governmental authority. They wouldn't go to work. They would sort of cast aside the mayors and governors and presidents and go, we want to talk directly to these beings. We feel that these beings should, have their case put to us directly by them themselves. I think the American populace today is ready to handle the concept that what we live in, the 4 dimensions of height, length, width, and time, is not all there is. There are more dimensional realities. There are advanced beings with machines that can skip from dimension to dimension, from galaxy to galaxy, using the Einstein-Rosen bridges, the wormholes. I think the American people, I think half of them know, and I think the other half, with the proper evidence, would be ready to accept it. It's going to take a mass sighting for the U.S. government to finally say, look, we're going to come on side with France, Belgium, Mexico, Turkey, Iran, and we're going to tell the truth, and we're going to reveal what happened to Tom Mantell when he went up in his P-51, what happened in the Great Lakes when I believe it was an F-104, I believe, was scrambled over the Great Lakes in the 60s. What happened to him? I think that if you have that type of sighting, then there'll be no choice. Well, I wouldn't want to go back in time and change anything, because that would be a tampering that I wouldn't serve mankind well. Although there are many horrors, of course. Wouldn't you have loved to have caught Hitler as a 15-year-old and have him drown in a river? Because then we could have solved the Holocaust problem, and then World War II may not have, well, look, there were 2 guys. There was Otto Dinkel. You ever heard of him? Well, he was an orator hired by the German army, just like Hitler was, to speak. If Hitler died, maybe Otto Dinkel would have been the guy that would have gone on with this rabid anti-Semitism and wiped out 9 million people. Of course, one thinks of those things, but you don't want to go back in time and play with events, because where we've come to today and the improvements we've made in human rights and in regarding ourselves as sacred, they've come because of the bad things that have happened. Now, if I went into the future, I would want to see where this planet is 300 years from now. Did we make it? Did we make it? That's what I would like to know. I'd love to spend an afternoon with Richard Feynman. Would love to sit down with Heisenberg, and of course, Einstein, Niels Bohr, Max Planck. I'd love to sit with the particulate, the quantum physics guys, because there really is the root of understanding how and why the world is the way it is, and the joy of these studies in antimatter that are occurring. I've talked to some guys. They say that 5th dimension, 6th dimension, could be right here by my ear and could be 1 millimeter wide and 1 millimeter across. You don't, because you're talking about, dimensions that defy any kind of dimensional understanding. And, there was I forget his name, he died recently, the last 2 years, but he proposed that there are parallel realities just because of the way we go through time. Like, here we are in this interview right now. Well, what I said and what you said and what we all did 2 minutes ago still exists somewhere, because we just did it. It's there. It's like a wake we've left. And if you had a time vehicle, you could go back to 2 minutes before and stop and see what we're doing 2 minutes before. You go back to your high school days. You go back to your days as an infant. And those realities are still existing alongside what we're progressing through. It's all a beautiful, beautiful mystery. I am here because I am a writer, a performer. I find it entertaining. I'm not a scientist. And I'm not a theosopher or philosopher. And I am just here because it is enormously, enormously entertaining. And mysteries like this are challenging, and it's really, really fun to contemplate that there may be beings out there who are concerned about our planet, and who may give us the opportunity to advance ourselves. It's really fun to contemplate. All the physics that we know on this planet, quantum physics and conventional physics and metallurgy and all of it, it can really encompass a theory of how these ships move. I mean, you've done it yourself, David, proposing that if you can convert a mass to a state of of photonic energy, then there is no mass anymore, and you're looking at pure light. You're looking at anti-gravity. You're looking at something that can be harnessed in waves. Well, what is the fuel? Well, people, Bob Lazar talked about this element 115 that was put into these generators to boil mercury and to be used as gravity tractors. Maybe that's it. I don't know. I mean, they must be using a fuel that's unavailable to us. Does it give off radioactive waste? What is the cost to them? For instance, the Venice UFO that you recently showed me, and I covet that tape. That's amazing. Because you see the metallic quality of the object, you see the force field around it, you see it spinning. Well, what happened? Well, we sold the show to Sci-Fi Channel, and it was called Out There, and I basically interviewed all of the people that I admired in various fields of study, like Colin Andrews from the Crop Circle movement, Linda Moulton Howe, the expert on cattle mutilations, John Mack. And let me just put a pin in things right there, because John Mack has taken the study of abductions, UFOs, right out through the other side, and he's going, yes, we know they're here, we know they're coming, we know people have been taken, we know there's experimentation going on, we know people have been told about agendas. What we now have to do is use that as a key and as a motivation to socially transform this planet to a more peaceful, more loving, more tolerant state. So his movement, the movement for social change, has just accepts as a fact abductions, UFOs, interplanetary intervention, and what he's doing is taking it out through the positive side of it and saying, now we must use it to socially transform. And I think his message is great. But I talked to him, I talked to the Allagash guys who were taken in the canoe on that trip in Pennsylvania. The last show we did, I had both Bassett, who has the UFO time clock, and then Greer. Both Bassett and Greer were there. They were my two guests for the day. Well, the show was canceled that afternoon. And I was outside, before I knew it was canceled, in between the interviews. And I was outside, and Britney Spears called me because she wanted me to appear on Saturday Night Live with her. And so I was outside having a cigarette, the phone rang. Oh, Brittany, how you doing? Oh, sure, of course I will. I turned away like this. I turned back, and there was a black Ford across the road, a black Ford sedan. And I was trying to look at the plate, and the plate seemed kind of like fuzzy, and I was, definitely a police car. And two guys were there, and a big, big, tall guy got out of the back seat, and he stood in the street on 42nd Street it was. We were at 42nd Street and 8th Avenue, and he looked right at me. And literally, I was on the phone. Hey, oh, sure, of course I'd love for the show. Saw the Ford, went back like this, turned back like a half second later, and it was gone. And that car did not go past me. It did not make a U-turn, because I would have seen 42nd Street. I would have seen that thing take a U-turn and go away. That car vanished. That car was a cloaked vehicle of some type. And whether this was like a warning to me, because the guy got out of the back seat, gave me a real dirty look. That car vanished. I know what I saw. And it was just this fast. It was, oh, hi, Brittany, sure. Oh, of course, I'd love to. Guy gives me a dirty look. Oh, well, sure. Car gone. That's what happened. And then 2 hours later, we were told we were not to continue taping, and the show was canceled, and none of them would air. I don't know. I don't know. Was that an MIB experience? Black helicopters, military abductions that happen. Sometimes people are taken and they talk about then being visited by military personnel and debriefed about their abduction. Was it a technology associated with some of these beings that are visiting? that wanted to warn me off, or that wanted to give me verification that I was on the right track. I don't know. But I do know I did turn back a second later, and it takes so long for an automobile accelerating from 0 to 40 miles an hour to reach the corner of 8th Avenue and 42nd Street going past me, and then pulling a U-turn and going out towards Times Square. I would have seen that car. And I looked around. I mean, I was looking for that then. It was gone. So, I don't know. The tapes exist. I have them. We're going to try to repackage them. We might put them out on DVD. Well, there's some media that are guilty of trying to suppress, and there are some media that are just throwing the story out there. Now, this Mexican sighting, we had coverage on Fox, we had coverage on CNN, and in the Daily News in the Valley here, we had a front page article, with the pictures and UFO, big question mark, and I mean, they were treating it. I think increasingly now, the media has to take into account that this is a reality. And I think, again, to go along with the theory and the feeling that John Mack has, let's get past the debate whether they're here or not. Yeah. Let's start to analyze who they are, how many of them are there, what kind of systems they're using, what their intentions are to us here on their planet, and can we utilize this knowledge to better ourselves as a species.
With the advent of the Hubble telescope, I mean, when you see how big it really is out there, and the idea that we're stuck on this myopic little ball, we're just glued to it, we can't get our eyes off of it. It's more of a mystery now than it ever has been. Why we're stuck here, and there's got to be a way to decode the matrix and finding out how these craft work, how we can get out into the universe ourselves. I mean, I think that's what this is really all about. It's not about trying to prove it whether it's right or wrong. It's like when the first time man saw a bird fly. Well,
the last UFO symposium conducted by MUFON, they sent me the book of the speakers. There were many, many scientific people in there, many astrophysicists, celestial mechanics experts, metallurgists, people who've been consulted on these cases over the years. No, I mean, when you have John Callahan, an ex-FAA supervisor, saying, yep, they're real. When you have John Schuessler, who was a Boeing engineer, now running MUFON, and saying, yep, they're real. When you have pilots and personnel in the police and military coming forward in the Rockefeller Report and in the Disclosure Report saying they're real. When you have a Belgian general on television showing you a tape from a fighter which is filming an object escaping at high speed, when you have this Mexican case, I think we can pretty well put it to bed and say, yep, they're here, they're doing things to us, with us, interacting with us. Whether we've had, official military contact, again, that goes into the black box area, but there should be no debate anymore. UFOs exist. They are intelligently manufactured and guided technology from somewhere else, not this planet. You know what? It's interesting. When I talk to people, well, first of all, people ask me about it. They come to me and they say, oh, we saw an interview, we heard an interview, they heard the thing on Art Bell that we did. They come to me and ask me about it. So it's not like I have to go out there and crusade and say, hey, did you hear about the latest Mexican case? They've seen CNN, they've seen Fox, they've seen the Daily News. They come to me and ask me about it, and I basically lay out, my thoughts on it. I'd say half the people that I speak to about this have either seen themselves, heard about it from a credible witness, or are willing to accept. The other half, totally not. Harold Ramis, my good friend and collaborator, does not believe, will not accept until, hard proof is presented to him in the form of, something tangible. And what I've been able to do is just open people's minds a little bit and let them think about it. And of course, the greatest proof are the kinds of tapes that now exist, the kind of videos that exist. Usually when I show some tape of some different things that have been exposed to me, well, it's pretty convincing. And then at that point, people have to go away and accept that, you know, that these things are a part of our reality. Well, what I'd like to, you know, what we'd all like to affect is some positive change in the world and try to help the tipping point where good tips to overflow evil in the world. I mean, you know, we know there's good and bad out there, yin yang, black, white, you know, there are you know, there's tremendous divisiveness in the planet, and, you know, perhaps this study and this understanding of things that are greater than we have accomplished technologically will lead us to a spiritual awakening, one that helps us respect other beings out there in the universe and other dimensions, and also in our own 4 dimensions and here in the physical world that we live in. The sacredness of human life, the willingness to get along a little better, to relinquish materialism and territoriality in favor of a more comprehensive worldview, in which we unite and we all feel the energy within us as part of a universal light.